Welcome to Natural Recovery from Suffering. This is Scott Killaby, and I have again my special guest, Toshi Matsunaga. So I think you guys are getting to know Toshi. He's been on my YouTube channel or different social media channels, and Toshi is my co author of our book, Awake But Sick: The Myth of Immediate Freedom and the Dangers of Spiritual Seeking and Finding. So I think the last time we were on here, we had a different subtitle, Toshi. We have to come back to that and explain in a second. I think we will in this podcast explain that probably why we wanted to
Yeah.
change it from the dangers of spiritual bypassing to the dangers of spiritual seeking and finding. Oh, that's actually my first question then, Toshi. Since what would you say is for you? Why did we change the subtitle?
Yeah, because I was kind of thinking back to myself, would I even pick up that book? Because I don't know about you, but I'm sure you did. I want people who's on the spiritual path to pick up this book and just to consider, not to kind of point fingers at anybody, but just for them to actually consider or that they might be bypassing. But if I hear the word bypass, I wouldn't even look at it. I wouldn't even flinch. It's like that's not me. If
Exactly.
bypass doesn't happen to me, like because I don't identify with it. If I'm bypassing, I'm identifying with it or something. All those non-dual pointers that I can pull out to avoid, and just I'll be the last one to know that I'm bypassing. It's like it's not me, it's everyone else, but not me because all those things. So that's why I thought that I would never pick up a book when it says bypassing or anything like that. But if it mentions like seeking or findings, oh yeah, that's me. That I'm seeking or I'm finding, I found, I had these experiences. I know what truth is, and all of that. And that's how I want to kind of appeal to or catch those people who might be kind of on the path, basically. Because yeah, when you're on the path, it's really difficult to know that you're bypassing or something like that. I don't know. How would you feel
Yeah.
about that? Yeah.
Oh God. I mean, I'm smiling the whole time you're talking because I can't contain my excitement. Because I remember we talked about this. This is why we changed the subtitle. Because I remember, being a teacher, people would ask me about bypassing, and I would give a similar response. It's like, well, yeah, that's a bad thing. People shouldn't do that. But I had no sense at all because I would be the last to know that I was avoiding buried anger. But the thing is I did explore it as a teacher. I read Robert Masters' book on
Mm.
spiritual bypassing. And I remember reading the book and saying, yeah, that's a real thing. But even then, when he laid it out, because he didn't really speak directly to repressed emotions, I thought that I wasn't bypassing because what he said was, hey, basically just allow it all. And that's what I've been doing it. I've been basically going into the body and allowing all emotions, but I couldn't allow the repressed ones. So that's another reason why I didn't hear the bypassing message is because it wasn't linked to the repression. You have anything to say about that, Toshi, for you now that what you know?
Yeah, I mean, one more thing I can add is I remember I used to just say, like there is no one to bypass, and that felt so true to me. Like,
Mm.
because I had this no self persona that I was in touch with. Yes, after my experiences, I clearly saw there was nobody here that is separate from anything else. That thing that's called Toshi. And I didn't know, but the conditioning and the suffering carried on. But at that time, it's like, yeah, you say I'm bypassing, but do you know that there's nobody here to bypass? And I would say that back to you, and that's how I would really avoid that conversation or convince myself that's the case anyway. So yeah, there's nobody suffering because there's no self. So there's nobody to bypass.
Yeah,
When you hear someone saying, yeah, these people you might be bypassing, but I could just say to that person, like, what do you mean? There's nobody here to bypass, because there's no self. And that's
yeah,
again the hyper independent. That's how we avoid everything. Like that's the
yeah.
shield. Yeah, that's how I yeah,
Well,
come
that
to that. Yeah.
that actually reminds me because we Toshi and I talked about this before. Is that what do we want to call this podcast episode? And I've been talking about bypassing, and but the thing that we haven't talked about, or I haven't yet, is the connection between hyper independence and the no self realization or the seeking no self. So that's I want to bring that in here based on something that Toshi just said. So where I want to take this, Toshi, is by keeping with this theme of hyper independence. Um, there's nobody to bypass. You express that, and I have another angle on it. There's a lot of angles on the connection between hyper independence and no self. But can you share about that when you say there's nobody to bypass and more on that so people are clear?
Yeah, so this, we in non-duality, we point to no self, how there's no separate self. And if you're avoiding things and if you have emotional repression, all of that, which we're gonna get into, we have to use those ideas and make it into a personality or persona. Even if you say no self, it becomes something. It becomes an idea, and it becomes a location. It becomes something that we can use to avoid when we don't want to see something. And like again, I said in the last part, it ticks off all the boxes. So any situation in life that I might have to participate or acknowledge or whatever, I can just run away to, but there's nobody here. There's no self, and
Yes.
it's so hard to spot that. And it feels really obvious you're just avoiding. But when you're in that, when you really believe that, and when you're really getting your needs met through believing that no self, then it just feels so true and so convincing. Your system eases, you feel so much better. Yeah, of course, there's nobody here. Ah, like the temporary fix and temporary, I don't know, pleasure that you get, from non-duality.
Yeah.
And, that's how we can really kind of get really caught up in that. And yeah, and if I hear someone saying, yeah, there is, but be careful, there's a danger of spiritual bypass, and that's not because just think about it. There's no self.
Right.
Again, bang, shield, put up, just like that's how I view it. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing I wanted to say about from a teacher standpoint is the avoidant dismissive aspect of avoidant. So with when we have buried anger and hurt, we don't recognize that our ego is dismissive. So when you go up to a teacher and you say, "Well, what about emotions or buried emotions?" and they say, "Oh, no, there's no self." That's dismissive. I mean, if you look up the avoidant dismissive thing, it says to disregard, brush off, or ignore someone's feelings or needs, often as a way to maintain emotional distance and avoid vulnerability in relationship. So, one of the criticisms of non-dual teachers is the lack of transparency and authenticity. But really, in many cases, dismissive. It can be dismissive of things outside of the no self paradigm, and it really is a paradigm when you understand that the system is using it to stay safe. It then gets relegated to a belief system. Wouldn't you
Mhm.
think, Toshi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it's almost borderline violence, to me. To say to someone who's suffering, to say, no, there's no self, there's nobody here. I just allow the suffering to be here because no one is suffering. And that kind of it's a really dangerous
Yeah.
way if you're a teacher to use that power. But again, I was doing that within myself too. So there's a teacher seeker relationship, but there's a relationship within myself that I tell myself. So everything that happens in myself to do with the relationship within myself that comes up. If there's uncomfortable feeling comes up, I'll just say there's no self, Toshi. Don't that's again, I'm actually like doing the same thing within myself. So it just carries on everywhere. But yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now I feel like I want to answer people's question based on where they are, but it feels like now that I've done my anger repression work, I can see where my own dismissiveness came towards myself. Of course, I dismiss my own buried anger. That's the main point here for all of us. But as a teacher, I remember just being very unaware of how I was in a relationship doing it. This is why I keep telling people, you say dangerous, and I'm trying to get people focused on we teachers, but we're going to focus today on hyper independence of seekers who are taking the no self thing, but it's a relationship thing. And so also it's a responsibility for the teachers to like it's almost like we have to in some ways connect with our own emotions because if we don't, we use the power of the relationship in an avoidant way to influence other people who are already avoidant.
Mm. It's gonna give me what I need.
The
But
safe. Yeah.
yeah, but the suffering won't let me have that, to be honest. It's gonna always gonna pull me back there. So but yeah.
It's amazing. I just thought about, I want to throw this out here because it really is, it's so big in the sense that, I just read that definition of what dismissive is. And it's like we have to dismiss our own feelings when we're kids. And then we have to become dismissive and avoidant of the people around us, many of us. And then we grow up, we're suffering. We don't know the root of it. We don't know that that avoidance comes from buried emotions. Then we so blindly go to a teacher or a who may also repress emotions and then who is dismissive of our feelings. It's trauma, you know?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
we needed a mom and dad, right? We don't need teachers to be mom and dad, but if we're going to have teachers, they really shouldn't do what mom and dad did. They should be more conscious, and I wasn't enough conscious enough to see that.
yeah. It really is mom and dad stuff, isn't it? It's so hard to see that again, like, because, when we get in our needs met again, it just, everything feels okay, you never question it, so yeah, but yeah, but it's also the teachers, like, like teachers getting their needs met too,
Yeah,
their own, parents' issues or, whatever, it's like how
totally.
they're getting their love by it's almost like a please validate what I'm saying and all of that stuff too, because something knows that it's not quite right here.
Yeah.
So just please validate me. And then the more followers you have, maybe you're validating yourself more. But then you
Oh
will
man.
suffer more, of course. Yeah, but yeah.
God, that's so true because I started to notice like I mean, having a lot of people follow you gives you a certain sense of security as a teacher, but you don't have connection. I even looked at the research. It's like the more followers you get, the more your engagement goes down. And I
Mm.
saw that through the years because I never really connected with my audience because of the avoidance. And I would just give them these pointers. I was like, and now I understand my anger repression was saying, fucking, I hate you. Get away from me. I've been angry my whole life, but I'm going to teach you how to be at peace. But don't come around me. That's actually what I was doing.
Yeah,
And people don't know that. They don't
yeah,
understand that when you just give people tools and you disconnect from them and you say things to them, then they're already avoidant. What that does to people, because I learned it too, is just come and get your tools and go. You know, you
mm,
can't really connect with a teacher much. And the bigger that they get, there's no connection. And then here we are trying to see no self in all of that. It's crazy when I see it from this angle.
yeah. I mean, by needing to see no self, you can't see no self, because the need to be, need to have something is already, and like we were talking about earlier, like, as long as we have suffering, it's almost impossible, or it's, you can't really see that or feel that or make that be true or something like that, because we have to use that for something,
Mm.
an idea, yeah, so
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, Tosh, unless you had something else here. I was going to ask you about some of your personal stuff with no self and hyper independence, unless you had something else there. Sorry.
no, it's okay, carry on, yeah.
Well, I want to target this whole thing about what hyper independence on a spiritual path might look like, because I think
Mm.
we've talked about it, but what are the nuts and bolts of it? Like, what was it like for you? And you said you were the last to know. Can you tell us some of the things that you were doing? I know you said it in the last podcast a little bit, things that you were investigating before you knew you had buried emotions and how that hyper independence played out a little bit.
Yeah, it's just avoidance and dissociation, that's all I can think about it, and then this was hyper independence feels appropriate now, because it feels like, I'm creating my own path and independence, just like, yeah, and I'm doing this for myself, and then I don't need anybody else too, because I was angry at the world and everyone else. Like, it was the fuck you to the world, to the independence, the hyper independence. That's
Yeah.
what it is. It's like fuck off to the world. I'm gonna do this myself,
Yeah.
and there's nobody here. What a way. So whoever's believing that dead self or separate self, you can fuck off, because that kind of, I didn't feel at the time because I wasn't allowing myself to go there, but I can see energetically it's so much about my anger and the hurt, really. And yeah, I did. Yeah, so a lot of dissociation. There's nobody here, or just like just that awareness place, or that reminding yourself to rest in awareness. What a way to avoid your life.
Yeah.
Every time anything uncomfortable or any compulsions, I didn't even know because it was so subtle, like how uncomfortable feelings or pain or anything comes, there's a compulsions. And it's a compulsion, nothing but compulsion. It was for me to go to
Yeah.
awareness or to remind myself there's nobody here.
Yes.
It's just, but it happens so quickly and it just feels like that's it. Especially when you have experience, when you found when you have a certain awakening experience like that, that you've seen the truth, and then it becomes a license. Can you keep waving that flag to say, yeah, I've seen it, there's nobody here. And we're not denying this, as you know, Scott, that there is ultimately nobody here.
Right.
The suffering and condition carries on, and that's what we're talking about. There is suffering. So, but I can come up with thousand reasons why I'm allowed to believe this and this is the case. And that's how I avoided, yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Because I was
Well,
so scared to participate in life. Yeah. Yeah.
no, go ahead. Finish there. Yeah.
No, because I was so scared to, if I can see now how scared I was to participate in life, because life means relationship, relationship with your family, with your money, with yourself, with everything. But
Yeah.
within that, there's pain. Within that, there's feelings. There's things that you have to feel because it's uncontrollableness is there. The real no self is in that. And that's what we're
Mm.
really scared of. The no self within the relationship. That's what we're scared of. I'm
Yeah.
happy to be no self. There can be the conditioning that, I'm avoiding. But to fully turn up as no self is the most scary thing, no? And I can kind of see that now. But we kind
Yeah.
of take the conversation a bit far now, but yeah.
That's fine. There's some good topics in there. I mean, I wanted to talk about just the resting as awareness thing from my
Mm,
experience, and then you can tell me how it was for you. But when I look at it as like a developmental issue now for me, it's like I couldn't connect with certain emotions when I was a kid. So I was avoidant of people, just like the avoidant and dismissive. And then the awareness, resting as awareness pointer, one of the issues with it is that you couldn't question it. I mean, as a teacher, I remember somebody questioned in one of my early teachings, isn't this just a mind trick? And I said, and I was quick to dismiss that. But I don't know if it's a mind trick, but it's a trick it can be to dissociate from certain emotions. When you're already disconnected from your body, it's hard to describe it, but I want you to talk about location in a second because you talk about it well in terms of location, but that's your language. My
mm,
language would be it's not as clear actually on that, I don't think, but it's like it's like the resting is a drowning already and a covering up already of the buried emotions because there's nothing in the resting that's taking any proactive measure to see why we're even resting. The reason that we're resting is because of the suffering. Where's the suffering coming from? So
yeah.
the resting keeps us from even knowing where the suffering is coming from because the buried emotions won't come into the awareness in the resting. And but that's just one way of saying it. And the way you talk about location is good too. If maybe people can hear it from that angle.
Because, I mean, I didn't know this, but I can see this now because I've done the work and I can really tune into even more than ever what awareness is. And I had to make it into this like vast location of vastness of awareness, this huge expanding space that is like in my head, outside of my head, all the way through the galaxy and all the space. And then, but I kept not, I can see it now how I was avoiding awareness within my body. There's how much awareness within the smallest places in my body, my cells, my organs, my feelings, my sensation. There's awareness everywhere. But every time I went, I'm going to rest in awareness. I got this vast, empty, beautiful space that is awareness. And then yes, that is true. That is awareness, but there's also awareness is here too, in the most intimate places of our place. So there's an infinite awareness, but there's an intimate awareness that is exactly the same. But every time if I have to come into this intimate awareness that's fully in our body to feel feelings or emotions, that's where the real fear is. And I couldn't come down to the body. If I give awareness to my body, then there's something down there that I didn't want to feel, which I didn't even know. So I would just bounce out into it and I would just, I don't know, naturally or subtly exclude my body out of awareness. Like, so I'll make it a non-body, non-physical place. When this consciousness awareness is fully in the physical places, I mean, it can't exist. Physical things cannot exist without consciousness. And that's been proven by science and all of that. But to include that means to feel something, and that's like a no-no for my repression. So that's what I mean by location or like a identification of some sort. When I mean identification, I'm making it into my place that I'm allowing, but not fully allowing. I'm making a safe place for me. So that's how I what I was doing, that I'm seeing now, where I couldn't come down to my body, where there's where there's but there's awareness here just as much as anywhere else. But I couldn't rest there. So I was just resting in this location that I created called, and it felt chill because the experiences I had felt this expansive, I don't know, just no distance place that is always here. It's always here and it's here and I'm speaking from it. It's here. But the mind and the conditioning can only grab that when this uncomfortable things comes up. As soon as the
Yeah.
uncomfortable feeling comes up, I'm triggered. That means my trauma is reacting. That means the condition is moving. Then the whole thing starts, and then I'm not here anymore. Because if I'm fully here, I have to feel my body. So I'll be in my mind or whatever, wherever I need to go to, as long as I don't feel anything, the awareness of
Yeah.
my body, basically. So yeah.
Well, you also, that makes a lot of sense. And you also mentioned, I want to see if I can take you in this direction. The hyper independence, you said no self is really in relationship. And I agree because if, the being able to feel and express everything gives us that embodied no self. If we can't express something, we tend to get triggered more like if you call a trigger would be like, I can't express something to you, so I have to believe something
Mm.
about myself in that trigger. So then we take a spiritual process, we might investigate the self and the trigger. But it not only is that a bypass, what I've noticed is like it's part of the disconnection or avoidance in relationship because so many times instead of discovering why I was triggered, my first marriage, I would pull away. There's the hyper independence. It's a
Mm.
disconnection from people, just like the definition says, and then a disconnection from the buried emotions in the process. So I'm disconnecting. The buried emotions are disconnecting me from my partner instead of being authentic or discovering why I can't be. And then pulling away again, disconnection, disconnecting from the buried emotions, processing the trigger for safety temporarily, then going back to my partner inauthentically, expecting that to work out well.
Yeah.
You understand the
Yeah.
problem of that?
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, Scott, like, is there anything else better than spirituality to get away from, to be hyper independence? I can't think of any other better way to get away from relationships and anything else, than
Yeah,
spirituality, is there? I mean, I can't, it's what it just ticks off all the boxes to get away from yourself.
yeah,
Yeah. Which is a no self, which is crazy. But you chase no self by avoiding no self. It's
yeah,
like, yeah. Exactly. Because that's what's really scary in relationships. If you can fully turn up the relationship as no self, you don't know the anger might come, sadness might come, you don't know what you're gonna say. You might say what you need or not need. And that if you can really check your body against that, for anybody who's doing this work, that's where the real fear is. And that's you could say that's to fully be authentic, to be here is really scary because there is nobody here in some way. So yeah,
yeah. Also, don't you think, Toshi, that the fact that the repression is behind the avoidance makes it hard for us to see it? In other words, if I'm given these tools or pointers that say just be with what is or investigate, but I don't feel anger, for example, that's what I wanted to bring up. Because in all those times in relationship, if my repression is anger, that's what I don't feel. And so I don't know that when I'm investigating things, I'm missing something because that's the thing I don't feel.
yeah,
And that's that part of the bypass is like, of course we would bypass. It's the thing that we don't feel. Because you said, well, if you could show up in a relationship and check your body, and you said, with this work. And I was going to slow that down because I checked my body a lot before this work and I never felt any anger.
yes, yeah, yes, this work because I check my body. I will sit with my body for a month and I get one thought out, and then something might just shift. And exactly. But that's how convincing and how powerful repression is. I convince myself that I'm not an angry person. It's like I don't know why I don't get angry. I really didn't. No, how I just couldn't get angry. That's how strong it. I just like a kind of gentle, quiet, nice guy. I convinced myself I was, who wants to be kind or something, which I didn't know how much rage was down there. So even if you inquire into that, if you're not doing this correctly and skillfully, it just you just almost reinforces that, that no, there's no anger, there is no coming up. I sit with
Yeah.
awareness and I'm just like, no, I'm not. And then you can just take that off and move on and keep repressing, but the suffering will come, as you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It also makes me wonder, I don't know if this is this way for you. It makes me wonder where I thought it was all going because when you look at the ideal, I don't know how other people hold this. You can tell me how you do. Like when you look at the ideal enlightened person, I had to go into AI and search this. Like, what does it really look like, liberation? Because the viewpoint that so many people have is like, well, that's just somebody who never really gets upset or is always peaceful. And I'm thinking, I don't want to date that person. First of all, I'd have to ask that person questions before because I know how repression is. And it's like, well, if you're always peaceful, okay, you would be really open emotionally in some way too. Like, in other
Mm.
words, to even have gotten to that place, you would have had to go through so many demons within yourself. And that's what I didn't understand about real peace. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can say a lot about it, but what came to me, any idea that I have for anybody who's listening, I guess, if you have an idea of what those people look like, it's the opposite of that. That's your way into,
Yeah,
that's what your repression is telling you. You can really see how your ultimate person, like a truth walker or enlightened embodied person, what do they look like? If you have an idea of that, then that's your repression, because that's just an identification, that's just a conditioning, and it's most likely why you believe in that. So we get our needs met because we can actually there's some benefits to believing that where there's utility. That's what comes up for me. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah. How
What
who did you think? What for you? What was it for you? Who did you think enlightenment person would look like for you?
I think it was Eckhart because I was an anger repressor, and he was the first teacher that I read a lot about. And when I would look at him, and now I kind of think of him as maybe somebody who repressed hurt and sadness, and he was angry ego. And so when he would talk about, or he would just be himself, he never showed anger. The way he talked about it was just kind of allow it, but I couldn't allow it because it wasn't coming up. And so I just imagined that that must be what it looks like. But then with the repression, that's kind of already where my trauma was trying to take me. It's the problem.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's so I just got locked into that.
yeah, it's true, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, this is something good to talk about, isn't it? Like, because I don't know, we talk about this sometimes, but I can't help but to think, like, I guess we can kind of vaguely divide into two repression. There's anger repression, there's like a vulnerability repression, right? And I see so many teachers are more anger repressed than vulnerability repressors. What do you think about that, Scott? You know, or within the community itself, or even people who spiritual seeks, are they
Yeah.
younger repressors, or is there a pattern? We can't define it, but I do kind of maybe see a pattern there to a point.
Yeah. Well, can I say something about that real quick? It's like, how would we know? Like until
Yeah, yeah,
somebody goes into their body, it's all conjecture, but you see all the signs of it if you look.
yeah,
You see all just so people understand. We want to say a little bit more about that. We create our environments for safety. So it's like if I get into a marriage with someone where we're both anger repressors, that's like a shelter for my anger repression. If I get into a whole community or an ashram where conflict never comes up, I'm safe at an unconscious level. So it's almost like anger repressors will demand their environment to be safe because that's what they create, those very safe environments. So if
yeah,
you're in a spiritual environment that is devoid of anger, that could be one of those environments. It's not that people need to be angry, it's that authenticity is missing then, usually.
yeah, I think so. And like you said, we will never know until we really check the body of that person, of course, and see what it's saying. But what I am finding is what I said earlier about the trauma bonding. So because whatever the anger repressed teacher would say would be very attractive to anger repressed seekers, you see. So if you're an anger repressed teacher, then the followers most likely will be anger repressors too, because you're just validating each other's beliefs unconsciously, really, so we can stay safe. For
Yeah.
me, with each other to create this space that is safe. And then if someone spoke up, or if there's any conflict, oh no, we can't have that here. It's not, there's nobody here, or whatever. We use that way, and yeah, that's how we stay safe, and how we make sure no one speaks up if it's an angry presser, that kind of place. So yeah, that's what I was kind of pointing to. But yeah, it's like, but you won't really know until we really start to do the work. But I do see a pattern more and more. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, it's not just I don't want to set the tone. It's just an environment where peace and stillness is, the main thing. But
Mm,
also like the radical paths, because somebody asked me about certain teachings. I'm not going to mention them, but like think about radical no self teachings
yeah.
and how that can actually be the same thing. It's an environment in which you would never know whether people have repression because it's not even brought into discussion, but all the signs are there because anytime you see anybody or anything who doesn't refer to the buried emotions because they're driving so much is me to me a suspect because then you want to look at, well, what am I if I join this. Look at cults. It's like we're there to stay safe and get love with each other. If I don't
Mm,
know why needs are being met here, even the radical teaching, if I don't know I'm getting my need for safety met here, a childhood need for safety by doing a so-called radical teaching that avoids buried emotions, that's how I see that now.
yeah, exactly. It is about whether you're getting your needs met and getting the pressure out of it. And yeah, to me, all of that too. Like, yeah, that's how, yeah, I mean, radicals, yeah, whatever it is, to be honest. Yeah, whichever way. If you're not talking about emotional repression, like, why not? Like, because, you can't ignore that part when you really start to feel into our bodies and tune into a relationship within ourselves or to others. What is it that we're actually feeling or not feeling? There has to be a conversation about that. But it's so amazing how we can forget or blank out or not even considering that when you are repressed, like you just, convince yourself that even though there's a huge chunk of consciousness missing or whatever that is missing, we convince ourselves this is the case, or something
Yeah.
like that. It's amazing how powerful it is in some way. That's how scared we are, I guess you can say. It's not the power of, it's the power of repression, it's the power of fear, of feeling and expressing those things. So yeah, it's like how scared I was. And it's
Yeah.
amazing. Like when I started to go deep into this work, like to see how scared I was all the time, like everything. But that's what Toshi was made out of almost, in some ways. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's true. I was going to ask you about too. So people, I think I brought it up last time, but you and I have gone through certain pointers that people pick up, and this plays into the no self thing because many of us pick up the pointers or just the talk of a non-dual thing. It could be a radical no self thing, or even an inquiry into no self.
Mm,
But then, well, the topic I wanted to bring up next, Hoshi, has to just do again with being a teacher because I see this whole thing as relationship because you brought up relationship. If I have a way of looking at things or pointing or and then I give you those ways, pointers, inquiries, practices, but those things are already avoidant of buried emotions and I use them for that. And I don't know it. Maybe I got them from my teacher. They're passed down. But then
mm,
you take them and then you disconnect from me, which is that again, that avoidant. Not that I could be with you all the time anyway. I'm just telling you how it works. And then you
mm,
go over there, you do those practices. You're not going to get to buried emotions because the tools are designed so that you won't. And you're going to believe that that's all you need because you trust me as an authority. And
mm,
now you're on your own and you're almost programmed into your own hyper independence to bypass. And I contributed to that in some way. It's not just seekers, there's a relationship here. And
yeah.
yeah, and one more thing about that before you is that I've learned boundaries because I will only give away the bypassing tools for free because and that's probably something we should talk about for that
Mm.
reason. And I'll just say, go ahead and answer, and we'll talk about that part. Secondly,
Yeah, I fully agree. Just it works both ways, not just teachers, but it's to me, I had this idea, like, like those teachers. are like drug dealers and they don't even know they're hooked to their drugs, like
Yeah.
whatever they're handing out, they also hook themselves. And yeah, and then that just carries on and they will keep, and the people who gets them will get their fix. And yeah, that's kind of how I see it really. But yeah,
Yeah. Safety dealers, I call them. It's a better
yeah,
word. Yeah.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, we can be in that situation. So, what would you say about that, just the relational part, in terms of how maybe people are affected and, yeah, how you were affected?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels true because it's about how good I feel, how soothing it is, when you take that drug, it's like, yeah, it works, and what he's dealing is true. Like what the stuff, his stuff is good.
Mhm.
And I trust this dealer because what he's saying feels true, and it gives me what I want, which is my childhood needs, really. I didn't see that at the time. But he's the guy who is gonna give me what I need, and every time I take a hit, it feels good, and then that's how I keep going,
Yeah.
not knowing how much suffering that I'm creating, but it's just a compulsion, and I need more. Then I might go to his retreat and get more, or I might watch more of his YouTube clip to get more hit, and it just on and on in some ways, and there
Yeah.
is relationship there, and but that's no different relationship than what I had with my parents in some ways or some, other people. It's just it kind of it just gets hijacked by depression, I guess,
What
However,
it is.
yeah,
It's by
yeah.
the unconscious. Because I was thinking, if I'm a drug dealer, I don't want to tell you, the addict, about the buried emotions that drive you to keep coming back to me. And if I'm
Mm,
a teacher and I don't, and I'm so unconscious in the same way, I don't want you to know. I don't
mm,
know about the buried emotions that make you keep coming back to me for nervous system regulation or love or even a realization that's a bypass. See, it's a
mm.
similar thing to me,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's a little bit radical, but I had to see it that way for myself because, we both we have our own stories. Let's talk about that real quick. So, Toshi and I wrote a book and we talked about it at the beginning, I think. But anything you want to say about that subtitle in terms of finding? Because, first of all, Toshi, you are a finder in the sense that you do have a lot of freedom. And
Mm.
yeah, you want to talk about that in terms of the insights that where we don't actually disagree with the no self thing and the freedom that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky bit. And before I would want to talk about it to validate it, right? And that need for validation falls away too, because the truth is the truth. There's no doubt. It feels like, it's not a thought, it's not an idea, you know. And that's what I guess the non-dual teachings always point to, but I couldn't see that. But now I'm really tasting that. And I'm tasting whatever is this no self thing. But it's not just no self, it's also a self, but no self at the same time. I
Yeah.
can't really speak about it because it includes everything. But then it's really no self in some ways. But I had so many ideas about it. When it starts to fall away, it's really kind of normal and not much to it. Like no, it's not a big thing or something. Like, because the conditioning and the depression made it into a big thing because I got so much out of it to get my needs met so that I can feel safe and not feel something. But now when those things starts to fall away, when the energy of identification starts to fall away, it's just another thought, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy to say, but that energy that I had to use is kind of being used in other things, or it comes back to me or something. So I've never really lost it. It's all this work is really about claiming that energy back of part of myself that I've lost or part of myself that I've given away because I didn't want to feel something. But that is behind that fear of feeling something. Yes, it is scary to be fully myself, fully be myself, but when that starts to fall away and when you acknowledge that fear and start to feel those emotions, it just, I don't know, it's ever deepening and I'd have no words for it. And I love to find more words for it, but it's more mysterious than ever in some ways. But some things are more sure than ever, more truth and real than ever in some ways. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah,
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah, it's a freedom. There is a choice in my life, not as a choice for separate Toshi and separate conditioning. Not that he gets the freedom and the choice back, but the life can flow the way it needs to be, and it's free to be able to flow the way it needs to, or something like that. And that's what I'm experiencing. And it's still scary. I mean, I'm not completely out of repression. Don't get me wrong. I still have my fears. But I'm tasting it more than ever, and then I notice those fears. It's about being conscious enough to catch those times. And I know the sufferings on my side. It sounds crazy, but without suffering or without any triggers or suffering, I will never know if I'm unconscious or not. But it's always letting you know, and you can really trust that. The more I trust that, there's something that I guess the conditioning is, it will let me know because I'm not gonna feel good, or I can tell the difference when I'm soothing myself, you know. And
Yeah.
when I'm conscious of something. So yeah, yeah,
That's actually perfect. I mean, we should end it on that, is because that's I've never heard you say all that. That's good. And I also want to say this before we go is the reason I think we brought up or I did, the change in the subtitle is because it's for me it's like the seeking and the finding, they both have to dissolve because as we say in the book, they don't have to, but there's repression under both and it's hard to see. And for me, it just gives me, like he said, myself back, or my true self, so I can live my life. I mean, a lot of the seeking and the finding is a fixation away from certain feelings that we need to be able to connect to have real connections with people. And that's where
mm,
it's led. So it's been weird that here I've written the eighth book with Toshi, but it's like I'm just like him. It's like it's not a big deal. It's like I finally get to live my life. But the great thing is that we have these tools. And what I'm trying to do, and I know Toshi, is not to make the same mistakes of the past so that we don't just give people tools and forget about their own avoidance, because that's not very connected. So I think
mm,
if you guys will read the book, we want you to stay connected to us on social media. We're giving away some free tools that you would have to pay for elsewhere. I don't know how much, Toshi, are you going to give away on your channel? And people can go to your social media channels too.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the 2D stuff, and because for some people it does take, I'm not denying some of the awareness pointing is still relevant and important, because some people that I work with, they still so identify with, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's hard to be with, see thoughts as thoughts or hear thoughts as thoughts, and the feelings as feelings and sensations as sensations when the trauma is huge, so they just can't even feel anything in the body, or they're just so cut off that they just can't feel any sensations, or they just bounce out all of that. And all the first dimension, second dimension tools are really helpful to kind of get you prepared to go into this deep realm of emotional repression. And there's no point pushing someone in, although we all need to get there. But everyone has their own path, and but if you work with us, we see the whole picture. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So we can guide you. So even if first dimension, second dimension tools can be a bypass, but we will talk about that. But as long as you know the context and you're working with us, we can keep using that in a much more skillful way. And knowing that something that you have to let go, but you might need it to really get into touch with your body, or just start to feel something, or just to notice that one thought that you believed in all your life that you
Yeah.
could see as a thought. It's like, no, to whatever, it's like, I'm not good enough, or I can't do this. It's hard to see that as a thought when you've been believing that all your life. Or I can't do this is a thought, but it feels so true to so many people, including myself. But just to start off by just seeing that as a thought and just feel that sensation of I can't do this or I'm not good enough, then you're already a step ahead. You're in a good place. And yeah, that's what I just wanted to say about that. Yeah, but
That's
yeah.
awesome. No, that's good. And then I was going to say, so Toshi's giving away free tools, and I am. And the point of the tools is also, speaking of connection, is if you don't want to work with us personally yet to process buried emotions, that's not free. I want to be really clear to everybody because we want to show people what is free. Because
Mm,
again, we're giving away free stuff so that you'll connect to us. It's not just for you, it's for us to connect more, but without the burden of mentoring you. We're being honest. We want to help you, educate you by giving you tools that are really transformative, but they also contain a bypass. So if you go to Toshi's social media, you'll probably get some awesome tools that you couldn't even get elsewhere. but he's going to explain things to you just like he did, so that when you use the tool, you'll have a context that will help you understand the stuff that we're talking about in the book. Anything you want to say, Toshi? We're going to give people a link to also come like do mentorship with you, and that's to process the buried emotions. And that, remember, that's the the stuff that's the paid programs, and that gives people a sense of where to go when I say it like that, because people get confused. We have so many resources now. You know what is free and what isn't. Toshi, you want to say anything else before we go?
Yeah, I just also want to just share about I'm also having I'm holding like a public meeting where I talk about where I connect non-duality and KI together. To me, it means not bringing non-duality, bringing relationship back into non-duality, all the things that we just talked about basically. But I'll do some experiential stuff there to show some 2D stuff to just to catch, that you might be bypassing or you might be using those non-dual pointings, so you can actually really start to experience and see what is going on inside of you. So I'm holding those monthly meetings. So yeah, come and join us. But that's on kirby.com as well. So yeah, I'm doing that too. And
Yeah,
obviously leadership and intensive too. So yeah, if you really want to go really, really deep and if you're really serious about it, then we can take you there. So come and work with us. Yeah.
totally. And Toshi probably and I will probably do some meetings together. He's doing some on his own. But people
Yeah.
who resonate with the hyper independence or avoidance, you can come into those meetings and you'll hear a different message about non-duality. You can even hide in those meetings. Take it from a former avoidant. You don't have to speak up or get angry, anything like that. But you're going to hear information in those meetings that you wouldn't hear elsewhere. Okay, Toshi, we're going to put Toshi's stuff in the summary. Thanks, Toshi. And you'll come back and talk to me, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.